The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everybody. Before I get too far in, I just want to check to make sure everyone can hear okay. So if you're having any audio issues or you think it sounds too quiet, there's a place where you can raise your hand by your name.
And we can unmute you.
And we can unmute you. Feel good? All right, so my name is Megan Kendig, and I am a new program manager here at Commerce. So I have brought plenty of backup with me today. I have Jeff Spring, who's a program manager here, and he's probably going to help me answer some of the administrative questions you might have related to like reimbursements and grant management. And I also have Cole Ketcherside here, who I will let introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cole Ketcherside, and I am the program coordinator with the Office of Homeless Youth, which is housed here at the Department of Commerce. And I'm here to offer some insights on the work that the office is doing and how it may align with the Homeless Student Stability Program.
Awesome. Okay.
Can I put one more plug in? If you entered your audio pin and you want to ask a question for the entire attendee audience, then you can raise your hand, and that will signify that you have a question to ask, and I'll unmute you so that the entire audience can hear you. Take it away.
All right. So I will be kind of the HSSP lead. So I've been kind of developing the guidelines, and I just want to throw out there that they're still pretty rough, and we've noticed some things we're going to revise and some just organizational changes we're going to make. So you'll be receiving an updated version shortly. And I also just wanted to mention that me and my counterpart, Kara Patrick, at the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, we're going to be setting up site visits, hopefully in the next couple months, just to not monitor or anything like that, but just kind of check in and see how everyone is operating their programs, and just get to know what's going on the ground a little bit better. So with that, I think I'm just going to jump in.
Hold on, sorry.
Oh.
Technical problem. We don't have visual.
Sorry, hold on just a moment. We're getting our visual set up.
Now
okay.
You're good, Megan. Sorry.
Okay. And we'll do questions probably at the end, but Jeff's going to be also kind of like watching them as they come in. So if something comes up that needs to be addressed before we move on for clarity, we'll do that. And also, we might not be able to answer all the questions here today, so if that's the case, we'll follow up, and I'll send out an FAQ after we're done. So, as you know, the HSSP grant is intended to link both unaccompanied students and families that include homeless students to stable housing located in the homeless student school district. The goal of the program is to provide educational stability for homeless students by promoting housing stability. And I think you all are pretty understand how the grant is set up pretty well, but there are two funding mechanisms. So today we're just talking about obviously the commerce portion of the grant. The OSPI portion is really intended to supplement their McKinney-Vento liaison and provide some support around education and for the homeless students. And then Commerce is funding the Homeless Housing Navigators, which is the partnership with the homeless housing agencies. So the idea is together they will work to connect unaccompanied homeless students with runaway and homeless youth service providers, and to support homeless students and families with diversion assistance and refer to the locally administered coordinated entry system. And I'm going to define those things in just a minute, because I know that there's kind of probably different levels of knowledge in the group because we have both lead grantees and subgrantees who might be a little more familiar with the homeless housing world and our grants in general. But the basic idea is that the McKinney-Vento liaisons will identify the homeless students in the schools and make a referral to the homeless housing navigator in order to make an immediate linkage to the housing resources in the community. So just to go over some definitions, so we're all talking about the same thing as I go through this. When we talk about diversion, we're talking about a problem-solving strategy that helps households experiencing a housing crisis to preserve their current housing situation or make immediate alternative arrangements outside of the homeless assistance system. So this is basically just a problem-solving conversation that's happening before you're trying to get someone connected to housing assistance. And we're gonna, there's another slide on this that we'll kind of talk about that a little bit more, but that's kind of what that basically means. And when we say coordinated entry system, we're talking about a system that is in every county that is set up to refer and assess people experiencing homelessness to the services in the community that will be the best fit for them to obtain and maintain housing stability. And when we are talking about unaccompanied homeless youth, we're talking about youth under the age of 18 experiencing homelessness while not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So first of all, I'm just gonna kind of briefly go over some more administrative pieces for the grantees, the leads. You'll bill us monthly, and invoices will be due the 20th of each month, and you'll be submitting those via the Commerce Contract Management System through Secure Access Washington. And if that doesn't make any sense to you right now, that's okay, because once we have all our grant documents completed, we're going to be sending out really specific instructions about how to get set up with all of that. And along with that invoice, you'll include a voucher detail worksheet, which also might not make sense yet, but you'll complete that along with some reporting requirements, which we'll kind of go over at a high level here in a moment as well. We will monitor the lead grantees' grant activities, and before we do that, you'll get at least 30 days notice, and we'll tell you exactly what the requirements will be and what we're going to be looking for. Just so that everyone knows, you can make budget revisions at any time with approval from Commerce, and we also may make changes to the guidelines as we move along, and this is a pretty new program, so you know, we expect that maybe you'll even come to us with things that aren't, like discrepancies, things don't quite make sense, and it's likely that we'll change the guidelines based off of that feedback. You've all already started putting your budgets together, and they're really pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but you have administration, operating, and the flex funding. In theory, the administration is about 15% of your overall expenditures, and that is likely going to be a small portion that goes to the school district and a little bit that goes to the sub as well, but it's kind of up to you how you want to do that. The flexible funding, we imagine being about 10 to 15% of the overall expenditures, but that's just kind of a template for you to start at, and we expect that you might, well, we know that some of you will probably be asking for a different amount, and that's totally fine. And then the operating is just what it sounds like. It's the pass-through to subgrantees to pay for program and staff costs. And so you might be wondering if there is a budget cap on the flex funding, or maybe someone asked that. And there is not a formal budget cap, but 10 to 15% is just kind of a place to start, and we'll negotiate and talk about final budgets, as you know. Let's see. So to talk about flex funding a little bit more, I think some of you, I've already heard some questions about what is allowable for those costs. And for those of you who are familiar with the typical consolidated homeless grant guidelines for flex funding, these are a little more broad. Since we're not allowing rent assistance as an expense, so we've opened up this category a little bit, but still $1,500 per household. But you can kind of think of it as just any cost that's going to be helping someone maintain or obtain housing. And that's really, if you're asking us if something's allowable, that's the question that we're going to ask. So there's obviously essential needs like hygiene items and transportation assistance, and those things are actually exempt from that $1,500 cap. And what's different is the other allowable costs, which aren't normally included in the flex funds, which is like utility payments or arrears and deposits. You can pay for rental application fees and background and credit check fees. And so I'm sure there's so many other things that will come up, and you can just feel free to ask.
IDs, identification.
Oh, IDs, yeah. Cole mentioned IDs, that's a good one. Anything like that. I'm trying to think of what else there might be. So I think someone asked me about if someone violates their lease and there's a fee around that. And we think that is definitely allowable. Basically just your rule is, you're not going to be paying for rent, rental deposits, or rental arrears. Did anyone pop in with a question?
We have a question.
Okay.
Roxana asks, McKinney-Vento does not have an age limit for unaccompanied youth. A student can be 19 and be unaccompanied if they are not in the custody of a parent or guardian. Will we be able to serve them, or do they have to be 18 and younger? So I don't know. I haven't actually thought about that yet. I've been thinking of this as like a K-12, and are there 19-year-olds who will be in?
High school can go up to 21 years of age.
Okay.
So I think the answer to that is as long as they're enrolled, where you're assisting them in enrolling in a public high school, then they're probably eligible if they're unaccompanied, even if they're 18 or 19 years old. Can everyone hear Cole okay? Yeah, so I would agree with that, and I'll double check, but I would say exactly what Cole said, if they're enrolled in school, then I don't see why we wouldn't be wanting to serve them. I think the definition for under 18 was to avoid confusion with services and programs that serve young adults. So it was more of a distinction in the homeless services side of things than it is so much in the educational side of things.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. And we can talk about that more too if that wasn't quite a sufficient answer. We can address that at the end. Let's see. Your general services, we're leaving, we really wanted to leave everything really flexible for service providers. We expect that your subgrantees will be prioritizing unsheltered and unaccompanied homeless youth when they're providing services. But there's really no restriction about, a housing status of who you're going to be serving. If they aren't homeless and it's a prevention case, what have you, we totally expect that you're going to be working with those families and students as well. The eligibility requirement will come up if you're wanting to provide flex funding. We will ask for documentation around homelessness, but I'll get to that in a minute, but I just wanted to throw that out there. And these things are just kind of typical guidelines that we use in our grants. Voluntary services programs must not terminate or deny services to households based on refusal to participate in supportive services. So those are things like substance abuse treatment or mental health treatment. And then progressive engagement service model, that incorporates diversion, which is something we're going to talk about in a minute, but it's flexible, might touch assistance at first with frequent follow-up, which determines additional need for services. Services are individualized and responsive to needs of each household, and prior assistance does not negatively impact future eligibility. And I didn't include this in the presentation, but you'll also notice in your guidelines that there's some just recommendations and best practices included from the Office of Homeless Youth. That is what they use in their guidelines, and Cole's here, and I'm hoping that they will talk a little bit about that just to give you some background. But basically, it's not something we're going to be monitoring on, but it's something I wanted to include just to give you kind of a flavor of what that office is doing, and just to give you a sense of what best practices are out there. So, Cole, do you want to speak to that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe the three best practices that have been included in your guidelines include positive development, trauma-informed care, and harm reduction. And I'll just spend a few minutes talking a broad overview about what each of those are, and then it'll be up to you to kind of do your own homework and identify research and resources that you can use to kind of bring yourselves up to a deeper understanding of those approaches. So positive youth development is a nationally recognized best practice for working with young people. Focuses on fostering resiliency through positive and supportive relationships and building on young people's strengths and abilities and cultivating what's called protective factors, believing in young people's ability to succeed and creating meaningful opportunities for participation. So what would that look like? It could look like providing mentoring and leadership opportunities, skill building activities, workshops, recreation, connecting young people to hobbies and areas of interest they may have skills or strengths in, letting youth determine and set their own goals, being youth-centered in that approach, and being consistent in terms of developing positive relationships with young people. Trauma-informed care involves recognizing symptoms of trauma, responding to the impact of trauma, emphasizing physical, psychological, and emotional safety, rebuilding a sense of control and empowerment, integrating knowledge of trauma into organizational policies, procedures, practices, and resisting re-traumatization. So what does that look like? Well, that could be maintaining confidentiality, informing young people about their rights ahead of time, providing services that are culturally competent, helping young people who've experienced trauma connect with therapeutic treatment and counseling so that they can have a better sense of their particular triggers and ways that they can cope, paying attention to the environment you are creating for young people to ensure it is safe, therapeutic, and welcoming, and creating a work environment for staff that is supportive and addresses burnout and vicarious trauma. And then the last one is harm reduction, which is a continuum of practical strategies that promote health, safety, and well-being through reducing consequences associated with drug use and high-risk behavior. And it addresses the condition of use along with the use itself, which is particularly relevant when working with young people who have experienced homelessness. As we know, a lot of times drug and alcohol use is a coping mechanism for dealing with homelessness. Harm reduction calls for comprehensive, non-judgmental, non-coercive provision of services. It seeks to combat stigma, centers the voices of clients, and establishes health and quality of life as the criteria for success. So what does that look like? And I'll add a little caveat here that harm reduction is very broad in terms of the different approaches and interventions that could be used. It is a continuum, and it's important to assess where young people are at on that continuum in terms of their ability to make changes in their behavior, but also where they're at developmentally. So if you're working in an educational setting and you're working with a younger unaccompanied youth, or maybe children that are part of a family, you're going to come at it from a completely different angle than you would if you were working with, say, an 18 or a 19-year-old who's been using substances ongoing for quite a long time, right? So really take that into consideration. But examples include, examples of harm reduction include simple things that we do every day, such as putting our seatbelts on when we get in a car, or making sure that we're staying hydrated by drinking lots of water. That's harm reduction in its most simplest form, but when we're talking about working with high-risk populations, it really is a counseling technique that you use to help young people understand what are strategies that they can reduce harm, that whatever activity they're engaging in is causing harm in their life. So what are ways that they can reduce the harm that's associated with that activity? It could also include providing reproductive health options and providing education around STIs and STDs, and providing access and encouraging regular health screenings, good hygiene, and connecting to treatment options. So there's a lot of different things that you can do there, and it really is going to be dependent on where that young person or where that family is, which will largely dictate the interventions that you take. But the framework is a continuum of reducing harm associated with high-risk behavior.
Awesome, thanks so much, Cole. That's so good, great information. And I think we have
Two questions. Melanie asks, are motel costs an allowable expense for flexible funds?
Are motel costs an allowable cost? Motel costs are not an allowable cost. That would fall kind of under that rent category.
Okay. Next question is, our district received the Commerce grant but did not get the OSPI portion of the grant. Can the Commerce dollars be used to hire our McKinney-Vento liaison at the community organization for a portion of her day to better liaison with the Women's Resource Center?
So I think I'm hearing that question as, are Commerce dollars kind of allowed to be used to pay a salary of a McKinney-Vento liaison? And the answer to that would be no. That is the OSPI portion of the grant. The Commerce funds are really to go for specifically that homeless housing partnership and that link to the homeless housing services in the community to provide that immediate referral and immediate connection to housing services. So that housing expertise is kind of what the Commerce portion of the grant is bringing to the table.
Okay.
All right, so just a little bit about diversion, because since we're not offering rent, this is kind of the meat of what our providers are going to be doing with households. And I've touched on it a little bit, but really, like I said, it's an ongoing problem-solving conversation. It's really client-driven, and this, it's like really creative. You're considering natural linkages to their support system. It can look like a lot of different things. It might look like setting up a payment plan with landlords and kind of mediating a conflict in their housing, maybe even with a roommate, or maybe even just asking them, like, who else are you able to stay with? Can you stay with an aunt, another extended family member? Just brainstorming with them about different things, different resources in their lives outside of getting like formal housing assistance. And that also includes utilizing the flexible funding that's available. Flexible funds have been used for tons of different things, from like getting it tired so that someone can drive around to look for housing, to getting an ID so that they can apply for housing, just really those kinds of creative solutions, things that are creating barriers for people. Maybe they're behind on utility bills and they're facing eviction because they're not complying with that portion of their lease. So the other piece of the services are, if you're working with a household where diversion's not successful and they're experiencing homelessness, providing that referral to coordinated entry and really ensuring that they're connected, more than just telling them where to go, like really handing them off and making sure they're connected to a provider. And that's kind of what we consider that complete referral to coordinated entry. Speaking again to eligibility, like I said, we're only requiring eligibility documentation for households who are going to be receiving flexible funding. And so this is like a little bit confusing because we're kind of requiring different standards for adults than unaccompanied youth, but the standards we're requiring for families are just our typical CHG verification eligibility standards, which is for homeless households, that's third-party documentation or a self-declaration of homelessness. And you, of course, can serve families who are imminently losing housing, and in that case, you'll obtain verification from whoever is providing them with temporary housing, and sometimes that's, that letter from a family or friend if they're not staying in like a formal housing program saying that they can't stay there long term, they're going to have to leave within 14 days so that housing is temporary. And then for unaccompanied youth, idea is really just to make this as low barrier as possible. And I think Cole and I chatted about this a little bit, and I think the best kind of documentation and what we would like to see is, just that referral from the McKinney-Vento liaison who's going to be working in schools to identify these students. So if that referral is received, that's kind of all that's we need to document that student needs help. And along the same lines, a self-declaration is acceptable as well. The other thing I should mention is there's some, I don't know, I might reach out to Cole to talk a little bit about this too, but so there's another, beyond just imminently losing housing, a lot of homeless youth might be staying in situations where they're, like couch surfing and other environments that aren't completely safe. And we're not going to, require that they have that sort of like eviction notice or letter from the provider saying they're going to have to leave in 14 days. More just, they're not in a stable
eligible. So that would include all of HUD categories 1 through 4.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any questions about that?
There is a question.
Okay.
Have all the OSPI awards been made?
Yes. All the awards have been made.
Great.
Yep.
Thanks.
All right. So I mentioned before that there will be some reporting requirements. And this is a really simple program, so the requirements for reporting are also pretty simple. But the way we're kind of seeing program success is households who are assisted with diversion, which is probably virtually every household. Households who are assisted with diversion and stably housed. And we do see that being more successful for households that are not literally homeless, so in streets or in shelters. We see diversion probably being more successful for the households who are staying somewhere where they can't stay permanently, or maybe even prevention kind of cases. For the households that are experiencing homelessness, we really expect to see like a complete referral to the coordinated entry system. And the way this is going to look is for those people on the line who are familiar with our database, the Homeless management information system. We will have a separate homeless student stability program project in HMIS. It'll be in the other category. Since we're assuming that everyone is going to be served with diversion, we're just going to be tracking the exits to stable housing and assume that linkage there. And then for households that are homeless and referred to CE, you'll be using the other option and likely have to write in that a referral to coordinated entry was made. And then on our end, we'll be doing our best to match those exits with program entries to coordinated entry in the appropriate county. So, and you don't need to like memorize that. We're going to be giving you a bunch of instructions about all of that shortly as well, but just to give you an idea of what that's going to look like. And that's really all I have prepared. I just kind of try to think of the biggest things you'd have questions about, and leave an opportunity for you all to ask questions you have that you've been sitting on as you've been developing your grant documents and everything. So anyone have any? Doesn't look like anything's coming through. So
can we get copies of the slideshow to take back to our teams?
Yes, I will definitely send on a slideshow, and I know there's some people, a couple people emailed me who couldn't attend today, so we've been recording this, and we're going to send out everything, so that will be coming.
There are, let's see, who will do reporting and tracking?
So I think in every application, the sub-grantees were specified as the folks who, and most of them have homeless, I think everyone actually is already a HMIS user. So the people on the ground providing the services will be doing their data entry, and but the lead grantees will be submitting that monthly report to us from that database.
Okay, next question. I know we have to write a contract with our sub-grantees. What are the steps for that?
So that might be, I don't know, Jeff, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I imagine in preparing your written subcontracts with your sub-grantees, you'll go through the standard procedure that Commerce has established. And if you're new to that, if you're new to contracting with the Department of Commerce, then we will make sure that you get the necessary instructions and the details about what needs to be included in a written contract. So we'll make sure that you get that if you haven't done this with us before.
Thanks.
What are other next steps for grantees?
Good question. So next steps, I think I've received maybe one grantee's kind of final budget and statement of work, but I'm kind of waiting on that from everyone. So once I receive those things and confirm that what I sent to you is looking good, or you send me back your revisions, I'll populate that information into your grant document, and I'll send that out for signature. And once I get that back, we'll be setting up your contracts in that contract management system, and you'll get instructions about how to set that up on your end. And that's kind of, then, yeah, that's pretty much it. You'll be able to get your program running and submit your first reimbursement request.
Great. Cynthia asks, how specific should the scope of work be? And do you have?
Yeah, so it's really pretty high level, and in that first email I sent you, I attached kind of just the template we're using for all of them. They're all really similar. So if you don't have any changes to that, it basically just says who the district is going to be working with and what schools the homeless housing navigator will be working within, and just, basically what the goals of the program are. So basically, you just need to look at that and confirm that all the partners that are listed on that statement of work are accurate. And
do you know the date that you sent that email?
I don't know the exact date of that email, but what county is that? I can just send it to you again.
Cynthia is from, looks like
Everett. Okay. Yeah, I can.
Which county?
Yeah, Cynthia, I will connect with you later today.
Can you please provide more information about the voucher detail worksheet?
I actually cannot, but maybe Jeff can.
But I can, sure. Cynthia, the voucher detail worksheet is a document. It's an Excel spreadsheet that we collect with each monthly invoice that you'll be submitting online. And basically, it has a listing down, the rows are the different budget categories that you can bill against, and the columns are the different subgrantees that you have. So what it allows us to see is not only the total billing for any particular billing period, but it also allows us to see what the individual charges are from each of your subgrantees for each individual budget category. And Cynthia would like to know, how many grantees are there for HSSP?
Yeah, there are 9 grantees. And a couple of those are working with, well, I think only Bellingham is working with 2 homeless housing partners. And yeah, so we had 4 the first year, and this year we have 9.
And she also would like to know how she gets her hands on that voucher detail worksheet.
We'll be sending it to you when we send out the instructions around how to access the contract management system. That will be included in that.
And that's it for questions for right now. Last call on questions.
All right, last call on questions. All right, well, of course, you can always send me questions as you think of them and as things come up. That's why we're here. So, and Cynthia, I'll reach out to you later and get an email out to you. And yeah, thanks for listening in today. We're excited to get this program rolling. So thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.